Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So today I'm going to answer a question, more really a comment that I get on my videos every once in a while, and that I certainly got a couple of times after my last video. Now, my last video was talking about Comics Perch and his attempt to answer the question of why a certain kind of ideology keeps on being put into comic books. And his answer was basically a non-answer saying, well, look, it's just a bad story. That's as far as you got to go. It's a bad story. But the comment that I usually get is, why do you go so deeply into these things? These people are just stupid. You're giving them way too much credit. And they usually follow that up with the statement, just use Occam's razor. And go back to that axiom, never attribute to malice what you can attribute to stupidity, to ignorance. So I'll give you my short answer to that right off the bat, and then I'll delve right into it. And my short answer is, those two things are not mutually exclusive. Who's to say that a person isn't acting out of ignorance, especially acting out of ignorance towards you or another individual, because of malice? I would say, yes, a person can act out of ignorance and the origin point of it being malice. It doesn't have to be one or the other. But before I expand too much on that idea, I want to go over a few examples from science fiction and fantasy writing. Now, I'm going to lean heavily on the production of comics because that's what I've gone over on my channel for the last couple of years, but I think this can be put onto any production of any entertainment, certainly any science fiction and fantasy entertainment that we all consume. So to begin with, I want to go over very briefly what I said in my last video when Perch was talking about the fact that these people, if they are trying to insert this ideology into their writing, they're not very good writers. So really, what does it matter? And I said, it matters because these people are just one of a massive host of the same kind of people moving in that direction. It doesn't matter if they're useless and ineffectual as themselves, because you can't look at them just separately and independently. Their entire point is they're pushing towards this direction as a society, as a group of people. That's what you need to look at. And just because this one soldier may be pretty ineffectual doesn't mean that the entire army of useful idiots pushing in this direction are as useless. Secondly, I have to acknowledge that there are some people out there, certainly writing comics anyway, who know exactly what they're doing in inserting this ideology into their storylines. They're not ignorant at all. They're not doing it just because they're in their own little bubble. They know exactly what they're doing. And the prime example of this would be Kelly Sue DeConnick. In her TED Talk, which she did over 10 years ago now at least, she talked about what the importance of comic books were. And what she hit on was, well, they can be used as propaganda. And she goes over, I think she said it was the CIA, or at the very least, the American government, who drops pamphlets of little cartoons in other places where they wish to destabilize the government by getting the people to rise up against their governments. This is what she says is the importance of comic books. And just add that to the statements that she made in the interview that I covered that she did with the New York Times, I do believe it was. And she said directly that the reason why she started to write to begin with was to change the world. And when she says change the world, she means advance progressivism in the world. But she said, when Donald Trump got into the White House, and by the way, she was doing this interview while he was president, when that happened, she switched the entire reason of why she was writing, and that reason then became to provide a safe place, a bulwark for the people and especially the leaders who are opposed to Donald Trump, so that they could retreat to that point, so that when they get rid of him, they can then move out again and retake the territory that they had lost. And I have to emphasize, this is not me exaggerating. This is exactly how she expresses herself in an open interview with a major newspaper saying, this is why I write stories. So she is certainly not ignorant in any way. And she is influential because she created the Captain Marvel character that we see on the screen with the Captain Marvel movie. And she is still somewhat influential because last week she did a book, a Wonder Woman book for DC Comics, which was at the very least reported as being among the top 10 comics of the last week. So she does still have some influence. But I want to move beyond that and talk about the fact that what I stated at the first, that these people are ignorant, but they're willfully ignorant and therefore acting out of malice, this, funny enough, is the exact mindset that they also have on the other side. Now, it comes from a very different origin point and therefore leads to a very different place, but it's the exact same mindset that the people who are pushing these ideologies through these stories have. First off, I'll go back to that quote from Sana Amanat, the second-in-command at Marvel Comics for almost 10 years, the vice president of content and character development, when she gave an interview, I think it was around 2014. And she said, quite specifically in that interview, the fans might think they want those old stories, but they really don't. And at the heart of that kind of mindset and that statement is, you, as the consumer, you're really ignorant. You don't actually know what you want. We know what you want, and we will tell you what you want. We being the creators of the product that you're going to consume. And funny enough, I just listened to another Marvel podcast where they were talking about what they called girl comics, because they're always trying to tie things way back in history, saying that Marvel was built upon Timely and Atlas comics and saying that's our history too. So apparently in 2010, Marvel came out with a comic called Girl Comics, which was chosen as that name because I think Timely did a girl comics book. And, in part, they were doing this roundtable discussion about this topic with two older editors from 2010 to about 2015 from Marvel Comics, and two editors that are there now, all of them female, because they're going to come out with a new Women of Marvel comic, which should be hitting the stands, I think, in March. And the point, by the way, of this comic is that only females touch this comic. Anyone who writes it, draws it, letters it, colors it, even they want the person who pushes the button to actually print the thing has to be female. And of course, all of the characters, the main characters within these books have to be female. So the entire thing is based around the female. But the point being that in that podcast, they admitted some fairly frank things. Number one, they said, well, women were always part of the production of comics. And if you took or take women out of the production of comics, you would not have comics in existence. That's one of their claims. But another one of their claims that I was a little bit surprised to hear was their claim that Marvel has always been on the forefront of quote-unquote progressivism, always pushing the envelope. And certainly, they said, you can't take the norms of today and apply them to what happened in the past because, as they say, those people back then were doing the best that they can. And they also admitted that in the future, the same thing is going to happen. People are going to look back at them and say, look, they didn't actually get it right. They should have been way over here as a progressive, but they should say, look, they were doing the best that they could. And if you take those two mindsets and put them together, you will see that they were trying to push all the time and had the facilities with all these women working at Marvel to actually push into a more quote-unquote progressive future, into more progressive entertainment, but they simply couldn't do so. They were limited. And what exactly limited their ability to do so if they wanted to do so and had the ability to do so? Well, of course, the logical conclusion is that the thing that hampered them from doing so was society itself, and very specifically a part of society which is their customer base. And so what they're in effect saying is the customer base were so ignorant that we couldn't push them any further. We pushed them as far as we could, but that's all we could do. And again, this is a mindset that is directed quite specifically towards the fact that you, as the customer, are ignorant. And so this is the exact same mindset of Sana Amanat in that statement where she said, these customers, they might think this is what they want, but they really don't. The point being, once again, is that these people know better. And you, as the customer, you're just ignorant. And in addition to all of this, if we look outside of comics, if we look at all these people who are producing things like Star Wars, walking around with shirts that say the future is female, why in the world would they do that? Well, I would say partly they're doing that to virtue signal in order to say, hey, you people who are already in this quote-unquote progressive category, look how progressive I am. But I think that's only half of it. The other half of it is an advertisement to say, look, you people who don't think this way, you're ignorant. They advertise it blazoned across their chest, saying, if you don't believe that the future is female, well, then you're in the wrong. That's why they have to advertise it. Because we all know they're not just wearing this t-shirt because it was something they grabbed out of the drawer. It is something they're doing quite specifically as a part of their public appearance, part of their advertising for these movies. And so, again, this is what they think. That you, the customer, I, the customer, we are all very ignorant. And you can see this especially in the way that comic pros deal with people, or really any entertainment personality deals with people on social media right now. First off, most of them won't even listen to any kind of criticism. I've done at least 2 or 3 videos about, again, Marvel Comics and the people who run it saying, we have to shut out any kind of criticism. And how deep does this go? Well, in my last video, I just put up on the screen in the background one of the news stories from a few years ago, where one of the older writers for Marvel, I think it was Dan Slott, had criticized one of the people who followed him because that person was arguing against what he saw as the people on the other side. And he criticized them and said, you can't even do that. You can't even argue with them, because if you argue with them, then you're actually giving space to their arguments and making their arguments more prevalent for people to see. Therefore, you have to completely shut them out. And the point being, the mindset behind that is these people are so ignorant that any of their points that they make have zero merit whatsoever. But if you ever do get to the point where you can actually argue for a little bit with these people, it goes in a very simple pattern. It's you make your point, they say you're ignorant, and therefore you must repent of these ignorant ways of thinking. And if you do not do that, if you do not convert to their side, well then you're willfully being ignorant, and therefore you're being malicious, and therefore they can then attack you. And will do so with calling you an isterophobe, trying to get you blocked from this or that, trying to get other people to get you removed from social media, etc., etc. It's either convert or die. And it's all based upon the mindset that you're ignorant. And if you continue to be ignorant after I told you to stop being ignorant, then you're willfully ignorant. And since you're willfully ignorant, you're doing something malicious, you're doing something wrong, and therefore we can attack you. But you might say, isn't that the exact same argument that I'm making? I'm saying these people are ignorant, yes, but they're willfully ignorant, and therefore they're being malicious. Now, I am making that part of the argument. I am stating that exact thing. But what you do with it and where it comes from are 2 completely different things than where these quote-unquote progressive people are either coming from or going to. But in order to get into that point, I want to take a little sidetrack for a little bit and say, yes, some of these people are simply as dumb as a box of rocks. But some of these people are indeed people with multiple degrees to their names and are still dumb as a box of rocks. And I want to talk about that for just a moment. And in order to talk about it, I want to bring it down to its most basic form. The most basic form being, there's a difference between intelligence and wisdom. And the difference being is that you can be intelligent, that is to say, you can have a lot of information in your head, and therefore know that information that makes you intelligent. But wisdom is something different. Wisdom is something that is beyond intelligence. Wisdom, in its ultimate form, is to see something from an eternal perspective. Now, what does that mean? Well, an eternal perspective means that you can see it from every side possible. But the reason for doing this is not just so you can see from every different perspective, it's so that you can see the connection between each of the things, how each one thing connects to another thing. But in being human beings, since we can't look at things from an eternal perspective, the best we can do is we try to understand as best as possible how to connect the things we know and understand those connections between the things that actually exist and that we know about. But these people, they're not wise in any way. Some of them might be intelligent, but they have no wisdom at all. I would blame the public school system because what it does is it fractures everything down into these separate subjects so that you can't actually see the connections between how these bodies of information affect and play into each other. But quite honestly, they're designed to do that specifically. If you look at the original documentation, which set up the ideas of public schools. If you go back to Europe during the Franco-Prussian War, a little bit after that time, where they came up with these ideas, the idea was to do so, was to separate all of these things off so that it became part of a system wherein the students could never actually question their schoolmaster. This is quite specifically what is stated in those documents, by the way. And the whole point being that the students learn not to question authority. And so when they go out into society, they won't question the authority of the government or the people who claim to be in authority over them. They have knowledge so that they can do the jobs which feed into the authority, some of those jobs being highly technical jobs, but they don't have the wisdom in order to connect the dots in order to see exactly how they're being used in this way. But there used to be this mindset that, well, you have these kids, they're in school. Sure, you're teaching them basic knowledge, but they don't have a fully formed reason. Therefore, they can't truly be wise because in order to have wisdom, they need to understand rationally the structure of how things work in what is around them. So basically, they don't have the life experience plus a fully developed reason in order to actually become wise. That was the job of what universities were supposed to do. Universities were supposed to say, okay, you have this basis of knowledge. You're now a person with a fully formed reason. Now you're going to learn how all of these things connect together. And that's what you would normally do by learning things like logic. And wisdom would flow out of that, because you're understanding the connection between all of these things, all of these separate bodies of knowledge. But if you look at these people and you look at universities right now and what they're trying to do, what they're doing right now is saying there is no overarching truth in order to connect these things except for the social. That's it. I ran across this interesting statistic over the last week. How accurate it is, I don't know. It basically said that about 95% of all professors in university are left-leaning, democratic, or liberal kinds of people. And if you go into something like sociology, you almost get 99 to 100% of the professors in that discipline actually being on the left. And none of this is surprising, to me anyways, if it is true, because again, it's all the social. They're saying there is no overarching truth in reality that connects all of these things, but we can construct one as a society. It is a social construction, a social construct that actually connects all of these things. And that's the only overarching truth that you're going to have. And so it's no wonder you get these people who are A, simply ignorant, B, if they're intelligent, they're not wise because they don't see a connection between any of these things, or C, if they do see a connection between some of these things, it's a connection that's purely made up by an authority that lives here within our reality, not by reality itself. And I'm going over all of that because it all plays into what I want to say about the connection between ignorance and malice. And I'm going to combine a few thinkers together here, but I'm going to go off of Plato and a quote that I quote every once in a while on my channel. It's from, I do believe, the 5th book of Plato's Laws, and it goes something like this. There is an evil, great above all others, which most men have implanted in their souls, and which each one of them excuses within himself and makes no effort to avoid. It is the evil indicated in the saying that every man is by nature a lover of himself, and that it is right for him to be so. But the truth is that the cause of all sins, in every case, lies in the person's excessive love of self. For the lover is blind in his view of the object loved, so that he is a bad judge of things just and good and noble, in that he deems himself bound always to value what is his own above what is true. So that endpoint really drives the nail home. These people who actually choose themselves and what they want and their needs above what is true, they're actually doing something which Plato labels as evil. Not only evil, but the greatest of evils. And this is not just Plato from 400 BC. This continues all the way through Western civilization. This idea that if you're doing that, then you are doing something evil. In the Christian terms, it would be you're being prideful. This self-love means you're choosing yourself and your self-interest above what is actually true. And let's break it down to what I always break things down into virtues and vices. Because a hero, which is what I'm always talking about, a hero is a paragon of virtue. And so the opposite of that, a villain, would be someone who is steeped in vice. And the thing is that intelligence is actually a virtue. Now, it's not one of the pure virtues, it's an intellectual virtue. The difference between those two things being that a pure virtue would be something that, if you understand it completely according to how reality defines it and live it out in that way, it will never lead you to anything wrong. It will never lead you to anything evil. An intellectual virtue, like intelligence, can sometimes lead you to something wrong. You can actually do wrong things with it. So you can use your intelligence to actually come up with something evil, but you can't, let's say, for example, be so completely just that it's going to lead you into something that is a vice. That is to say, something that is opposed to reality, that is to say, something that is evil. And so here's point number one. Point number one being that if these people are ignorant, and they are actual adults, I'm sorry, but if you're an adult, you have no excuse. If you're a kid and you're ignorant, well, you don't have the life experience in order to combine it with your fully formed reason in order to wisely understand how these things work. But if you're an adult, you got no excuse like that. If you continue in your ignorance, after having gone through the experience of living in reality and having reality point you in the direction of, no, I'm sorry, you're wrong here, and you deliberately ignore it, that's willful ignorance. And that willful ignorance leads you to dealing with other people and with reality itself, where you say, what I want is more important than you. What I want is more important than reality. Then these people are being malicious. Deliberately malicious. Again, sure, they're ignorant, but they're willfully ignorant, and being so willfully ignorant and then dealing with you in this ignorant fashion is therefore a malicious thing, because they know at the heart of it that they believe that they are superior to you, or their needs are superior to you. What they want, what is theirs, is more important than the truth, and therefore certainly more important than you. So back to my point where I said, am I not arguing the exact same thing as them? Well, to some degree, yes. But the importance, once again, is the starting point, which then determines the end point. Because they are saying, you are ignorant, and if you're willfully ignorant, then you're being malicious. But the point is, where does that ignorance come from in their minds? Well, that ignorance, on your part, comes from you not accepting what has been told you as true by an authority. And so, you must accept, according to that authority, it is true in order to then, quote-unquote, educate yourself, and therefore extract yourself from being malicious. So part and parcel of their entire way of thinking is that some people are more important than other people. And if you're ignorant, you're one of those people who are less important. You're one of those people who are not part of the authority, and therefore you simply must submit to them. There is no other appeal besides to them. You cannot go back to anything more fundamental. They are the stopping point, and if you don't listen to them and their authority, then you do wrong. But my point, which is a reflection of the point made by Western civilization for more than 2,000 years, is the fact that, yes, you're ignorant, and you're being willfully ignorant, therefore you're being malicious. But the point is you're being ignorant because you're not listening to the truth. And who determines what the truth is? Well, there is no who that determines what the truth is. Reality determines what the truth is. That's it. And so the point being, in their system, you as an individual are less, because you must submit to the people who know better than you. But in the old system, the system that I'm talking about, you don't have to submit to another individual in order to find out what is true. Now, you must submit yourself to reality, but reality doesn't have an agenda. Reality isn't trying to get its own way. Reality never lies to you, and it certainly never tries to change the rules midway through what you're doing. And you, as an individual, can use your senses, your common sense, in order to understand what reality wants you to do. That's really what common sense means in its original form. It's that you take all of your senses, and back in the medieval period when they're talking about this, they're talking about senses more than just the 7 senses that we have with sight, hearing, touch, all of that. They're talking about all of the other senses that you have as well. That's where we get expressions like a sense of justice. That's where we get expressions like a sense of humor. You take all of those senses, and when all of those senses are combined and they tell you the exact same thing, then that's real. And you can chalk it up to common sense. So the important distinction is the fact that within the quote-unquote progressive way of thinking, you must first submit yourself to someone who is better than you in order to understand the truth. And therefore, then you can be less ignorant and therefore not be evil. But within the classical way of thinking, you don't need to submit to anyone. As an individual, let's say you were abandoned on another planet. We'll go science fiction. You're abandoned on another planet as a tiny little infant and you grow up. You could come to the same conclusions that I come to. Why? Because you can use your senses in order to have common sense. And therefore, we can come to the same conclusion. You're not going to come to the same conclusion as these people because you don't have an authority standing over you to tell you what you need to think. And so, as I said, this beginning point is supremely important because it determines the end point. And again, their end point is to say, you're ignorant and you're being willfully ignorant, therefore you're being malicious, therefore we can attack you. But my point being is that I'm not going to attack anyone. If I say you're ignorant and you're therefore being willfully ignorant and it's coming from a malicious place, I'm not going to attack you because of that. Now, my solution to this is the solution that I gave in my video about gatekeeping, saying that gatekeeping just isn't enough. We need something more. We don't need artificial walls. We need the natural walls of these giant mountains that will encircle us. And I got a lot of people saying, you're being too abstract. What do you mean by this? Well, what I mean by this is the fact that I'm neither going to defend nor attack you. I'm simply going to lay bare what is true. And I'm sorry, this may seem a bit harsh, but when I lay bare what is true to someone who lives their life in opposition to what is real and true, then reality and truth will attack them. Like that old saying goes, you don't defend a lion when it's being attacked. You simply let it free, and it will defend itself. That is what the truth is. You don't defend the truth, you simply let it free, and it will defend itself. So my endpoint is not to attack the other side because they're being malicious. My endpoint is to go over the connections between these things, show the wisdom that is the connection between these things, to lay bare what is true, to lay bare reality, to get people to see that you need to treat these people on the other side, these quote-unquote progressive people, with harsh reality. You need to stop shielding them against what is real. And the funny thing being that we have all been conned into trying to defend these people for one reason or another, when if we try to hold up a shield for them to defend them, what will they do? They'll stab us in the back. Quite honestly, that is what our present society consists of. You have people who have been conned into holding up a shield for those people who deny reality. And when you hold up that shield so they won't be impacted by reality, those deniers of reality will simply stab you in the back. So stop using their language. Stop acquiescing to these people. Stop pandering to their mental delusions. And say, I'm sorry, I understand you feel this way, but your feelings do not coincide with reality, therefore I don't care about your feelings. And every time you play the victim, every time you look up with puppy dog eyes, either at me or our society and say, please help me, please defend me, what you're really saying is that my feelings are more important than reality. And you can bet your bottom dollar that if they're saying that, they're also saying that my feelings are more important than you, the individual. Quite simply. And they further want you to build up those walls to defend their ignorance so that they can be quite directly and specifically malicious to you. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. All right, I'll leave it there. I'll see you later. Bye.